former members revealed a hidden side of Jehovah's Witnesses. Few people know, but Jehovah's Witnesses do not consider themselves to be just a religion. They believe they're the only true organization authorized by God on earth. It changes everything, because when you see the world through this lens, everything outside is suspicious, corrupted, or even demonic. If you have ever seen someone knock from door to door, or know someone who is part of the group, you may think it is just a devout faith, but the inner reality is much more complex, and often much harder than it seems. In this video, we will examine the behind the scenes of the organization, its origin, its practices, and especially the profound effects that its model of control imposes on its members, even on the most vulnerable, children, adolescents, and former members who still live under the weight of fear and guilt. 1. The origins and weight of prophecies failures. The movement began in the late 19th century, led by Charles Taze Russell. Dissatisfied with the Christian churches of the time, he began to study the Bible alone and was strongly influenced by Adventism, especially by ideas about the end of the world. Russell believed that 1914 would mark the beginning of Armageddon. When this did not happen, new dates were released, 1925, then 1975. None materialized. Even so, the organization continued reinterpreting predictions, saying that the divine light becomes clearer with time. These constant changes caused frustration in many believers, but most remained faithful. Confidence in the so-called governing body, the group that leads the organization, has remained strong. And that's the central point. No matter the mistake, the leader is always right. 2. Total control. Life monitored in detail. Unlike other religions, Jehovah's Witnesses regulate virtually every aspect of the life of believers, from friendships, professional choices, to the prohibition of birthdays, Christmas, blood transfusions, and even higher education. These rules come from the governing body, a group of leaders who consider themselves to be the only legitimate channel between God and humanity. Disagreeing with them is like disagreeing with Jehovah himself, and it creates an environment where questioning is not only frowned upon, it's dangerous. The result is absolute obedience that shapes personal, professional, and family choices. Many leave opportunities for study and employment to devote themselves fully to the organization. Life outside of it becomes unthinkable and often even frightening. 3. The impact on children and adolescents, new topic. Little is said about how all this affects the younger. Children born within the organization grow up learning that the world outside is evil, that outsiders are bad influences, and that Armageddon can come at any moment. Adolescents are discouraged from going to college, dating freely, or developing a critical sense. There are reports of young people who face intense family conflicts by demonstrating doubts about beliefs or wishing for a different life. The psychological pressure is constant. In many cases, the fear of the imminent end, reinforced in meetings and literatures, generates anxiety, nightmares, and feelings of guilt even for normal age desires. Growing up in this environment can leave lasting marks on emotional health and identity building. This is an essential point that cannot be ignored. The burden of bearing, from early on, the feeling that your salvation depends on total obedience. For disassociation, the price for thinking differently. Imagine growing up in a community where all your friends, family, and even coworkers are part of the same religion. Now imagine that by disagreeing with a rule or deciding to leave, you are summarily cut off from the lives of all of them, as if you no longer existed. This is exactly what happens to Jehovah's Witnesses. It is called disassociation. Disassociation is a disciplinary measure used against members who commit grave sins, express doctrinal doubts, or decide to withdraw. But what makes this really severe is not only the expulsion, but the absolute isolation that follows. Parents stop talking to their children. Brothers see strangers. Friends of a lifetime cross the street to avoid a simple hi. The contact is cut even in social networks. The official justification? Keep the congregation spiritually pure and avoid bad influences. But in practice, it is an extremely powerful emotional and psychological punishment mechanism. Many former members report that the pain of isolation overcomes even previous traumas. Loneliness, loss of identity, and feelings of rejection lead to deep depression, chronic anxiety, and in some cases, suicidal ideation. And the most cruel, there are not a few who return to the organization not by belief, but by sheer despair, because they cannot stand living without their own children, parents, or partners. Faith, at this point, ceases to be a spiritual choice and becomes a social prison. This controlled affection, this manipulation to the fear of losing everything and everyone, reveals a kind of silent but deeply efficient power. The power to control not only what the person believes, but what he is. 5. Silence and impunity. When truth is suppressed. Within the structure of Jehovah's Witnesses, there's an internal guideline that determines that any serious accusation can only be carried forward if there are at least 2 eyewitnesses. The problem? Abuses, especially of sexual nature, rarely happen in front of anyone, and that is where the scandal lies. This absurd demand has been used systematically to cover up reports of child abuse, domestic violence, and harassment. Many victims are discredited, pressured to shut up, or told to wait on Jehovah, while the accused go on without any practical consequence. Leaked internal reports and documents show that the organization directs elders, their local leaders, not to cooperate with external investigations and protect the image of the congregation above all else. This means that instead of helping to punish guilty, the priority is to avoid public scandals. When these cases come to light, whether by the media, former members, or victims, the response of the organization is standardized. They accuse the society of religious persecution and instruct their faithful not to read or watch critical content. This internal protection cycle creates an environment where truth is filtered and abuse is silenced, a place where victims are not heard, and culprits often continue to exercise spiritual authority over other members. The question that remains is straightforward. Why a religion that claims to represent truth is so afraid of transparency? 6. Routine, pressure, and fear that never rest. The life of a Jehovah's Witness revolves around one single mission: to serve Jehovah as part of the organization. This means that practically all free time should be devoted to religion, whether through door-to-door preaching, weekly meetings, constant reading of official publications, or participation in congresses and assemblies. It is a rigid and intense routine, which requires not only physical presence but emotional involvement. Members are encouraged, indeed charged, to record how many hours they dedicate to field service, how many people have approached, how many publications they have delivered. There is a constant sense of performance, of spiritual charge disguised as devotion. But behind this active structure, there is something more subtle but devastating: permanent fear. The organization teaches early on that Armageddon is very close. At any moment, God will destroy the world, and only the faithful will survive. This belief is not only symbolic, it is lived with literality. Imagine growing up thinking you can die or lose everything for any mistake, impure thought, or lack of dedication. This constant fear generates anxiety, sleep disorders, deep guilt, and a feeling that one is never good enough. After all, any failure can mean death at the end of the world. And as if that were not enough, pursuing higher education or growing professionally is discouraged, seen as something that can divert attention from the kingdom. As a result, many members live in limited financial conditions, dependent on the community, and with few prospects of real independence. It is not uncommon for former members to describe the experience as living in a parallel reality, because out of there, everything seems new, strange, and even dangerous. After all, that's what they always told them. And going out requires more than courage, requires reconstruction. 7. Starting again, the pain and freedom to leave everything behind. Leaving the organization is one of the most difficult steps a former member can take, not only because it involves breaking with a belief system, but because it means losing an entire network of social, family, and emotional support. Many who leave Jehovah's Witnesses go through a painful process of rebuilding identity. It is like relearning to live. Find out what they like, what they believe, how to relate to the world and other people. All this needs to be redone from scratch. But there are also stories of resilience. People who, after years of submission, found freedom, developed a critical sense, resumed studies, built new friendships, and created families based on genuine affection, not rules imposed by an institution. These stories are powerful because they show that there is life after fear, there is purpose beyond control, and there is faith that comes from freedom, not coercion. The exit is painful, yes, but for many, it's the first real step toward autonomy. And instead of living in fear of the end of the world, they start to build, finally, a world of their own. 8. When faith ceases to be freedom and becomes control. Throughout this video, you have encountered deep and often hidden layers of the reality experienced by those who are part of Jehovah's Witnesses. Since its origins marked by prophecies that never came true, passing to the rules that control daily life, relationships, thinking, and even access to education, to the extreme mechanisms of social punishment such as disassociation and family isolation, all make up a system that presents itself as spiritual, but operates in a structurally authoritarian way. We talk about the direct impact of this on children and adolescents, raised in an environment where questioning is dangerous and fear is a constant. And we have seen how this model generates silent suffering, often invisible even for those who are inside. What is revealed here is not just a set of beliefs. It is a closed life project where individual freedom only exists within the limits set by a small group of leaders who proclaim themselves the only channel of communication with God. The question that remains is simple, but essential. When faith demands blind obedience, breaks emotional ties, and silences victims, can we still call it faith? It is not a matter of judging who believes, but to reflect on the effects that certain systems have on individuals. No belief should require someone to erase themselves in order to be accepted. So, if you've come this far, it's worth a second step. Question, search, listen to other voices, including those who left. Only then you will have real conditions to form your own vision, without filters, without fear, and without pressure. If this content made sense to you, share it with those who need to hear it. And if you've already lived something similar or know someone who's gone through it, leave your comment below. Your story can give courage to those who are still trying to get out. In the next videos, we will continue bringing topics that help to see what many people prefer to hide. Until then,